is entitled I Am One in Four. Any of us can face challenges building whānau. 26% of Kiwis face infertility during their lifetime, affecting men and women equally. It can impact on any New Zealand regardless of factors such as ethnicity, education, urban, rural, and religion. The campaign aims to support and educate people who are currently trying to conceive, reduce stigma, and raise awareness amongst people who may be affected in the future. For those of you not familiar with Fertility New Zealand, we're a registered charity and we walk alongside all people facing fertility challenges. We have a dedicated helpline and provide support, information and guidance to anyone at any stage of their journey. Check out our website for more information. I am delighted to introduce you tonight to our speakers, Christian Newman, parent via surrogate and Love from My Dad's, and Stewart Dalley, solicitor from D&S Law. Sorry about that, Stewart. They will be presenting tonight's webinar, Whānau Building in the Rainbow Community. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat box. If you have any direct questions for either Stewart or Christian, please start your question with their name and they will answer questions throughout the webinar. Thank you for joining us tonight and we hope you enjoy the webinar. Over to you, Christian and Stewart.
Thanks, Kate. Kia ora, everybody.
Hi there, I'm Stewart. So I think I'm going to kick off, Christian, with some slides about the law and how it treats family building. So if we can just, yes, I can do that. I can skip through to these slides. So I'm going to cover the different ways of our rainbow community can have children and what the law says about that. So first of all, let's look at adoption. Our current adoption laws are being reviewed by the Ministry of Justice at the moment. So if you've not had an opportunity to make comment about those laws, then you should get yourself involved in making comment on them, because in terms of the rainbow community, there's a number of factors that are discriminatory in that law as written, as was decided by the Human Rights Review Tribunal back in 2016. Some of these things have been clarified by the courts, and the courts that have made workarounds in respect of them. So one of them being that what the law says is married people can adopt jointly, but it doesn't expressly say that de facto couples can adopt or civil union partners can adopt. But the courts have interpreted married couple to mean de facto couples, including same-sex de facto couples. In fact, myself and my partner were the first same-sex de facto couple to adopt children in New Zealand. So, you know, the courts have had to work with this old piece of legislation from the 1950s to try and make it workable, but there still are issues in there. But I think for me, that for a lot of gay people, especially, we find ourselves in surrogacy situations, not necessarily because that was your first port of call. It's because your other options are effectively closed off to you. Adopting a stranger adoption within New Zealand is a fairly rare thing now, compared to what it used to be in the past. So people then look at inter-country adoption, where you would adopt a child in another country. But for members of the rainbow community, as it shows at the bottom there, the only country in the world that New Zealand has an agreement with around inter-country adoption that permits members of the rainbow community to adopt is Hong Kong. But the number of inter-country adoptions from Hong Kong is penny numbers, the amount of ones. So where our big countries are places like China, India, and Thailand, but all of those countries are closed to members of the rainbow community because they don't recognize those relationships. So what it means is a lot of people are forced into surrogacy who wouldn't necessarily, that would be their first choice. So I think when we are reviewing our adoption laws and our inter-country adoption laws, we also need to look at the countries that we do our business with in relation to rainbow people. So
just on that, Stewart, I find that really interesting. Don't mind me just jumping in. That's exactly right. For us, we wanted to adopt first and foremost, and we went through the adoption process. We looked at the inter-country, and actually at the time, and maybe we were wrong, we didn't believe there were any international adoption available at the time. So has Hong Kong just come online? Is that a recent agreement, or has that been around for a while?
I'm not entirely sure, Christian. I just looked at this recently myself, so that's when my understanding was before that there was none. But I think actually it's probably not. I think we've had Hong Kong for a while, but I think Hong Kong has changed its laws in relation to same-sex couples. So that's probably what's brought the change around there. Yeah.
Got it. But, I mean, we get asked all the time about, why didn't you adopt? There's so many kids in the world, and you see on forums around the world and online with same-sex couples, why wouldn't you adopt? There's so many kids. Why would you go down the surrogacy route? And it's exactly for this reason. Adoption in New Zealand is so hard to adopt from the random pool of families within New Zealand, and then there's a massive waiting list within that. And then, of course, the international adoption is closed. Well, very, very limited as well. So, super interesting.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about access to publicly funded fertility treatment for members of the rainbow community. So lesbians and single females are treated, well, I think what the issue here with access to public fertility treatment is there's a limited pool of money, so the rules are made around eligibility criteria to get public treatment, and then we've tried to be equal about it, but in our aim to be equal, we've failed to recognize that we're not dealing with a level playing field when it comes to members of the rainbow community. So for instance, the access point to publicly funded fertility treatment for lesbian couples differs from, and single women differs from heterosexual couples. So a heterosexual couple needs to have 12 months of intercourse without achieving a pregnancy. Obviously, a lesbian couple cannot achieve a pregnancy through sexual intercourse, right? So what the rules say is, for a lesbian couple, you need to have done 12 cycles of privately funded donor insemination, 6 of which must have been undertaken at a clinic. And then if you're still unable to conceive, then you can be assessed against the standard criteria to gain publicly funded treatment. Well, I think to me, there's obvious reasons why the woman isn't pregnant. You say to yourself, well, if you've went through 12 cycles of treatment and you still haven't achieved a pregnancy, why are you going to achieve it on number 13? But as it says there, if there's a clear biological reason preventing it, then you can bypass the 12 cycles and go straight to treatment. What to me, it's, well, if you're a lesbian couple or a single woman, then you need to find the money to pay for that 6 privately funded treatments. And if you don't have the money, then you're never having a baby. So you've got this access issue to start with. And then moving on, where am I? 7. The same goes for guys. So a male sex couple or a single man wishing to access public treatment, it requires the man who wishes to become a father to have no sperm, and that only affects 1% of the male population of the country. So it insists on a medical issue when there's a clear bloody medical issue that's preventing you from getting pregnant because you and your partner can't actually conceive of a child together, you know. So it's it layers an extra level of hurdle on you, because, you know, as I say, such couples are inherently socially infertile. They just can't achieve a pregnancy no matter what they do. So again, this creates a financial barrier for male couples or single men wanting to have a child. And then for transgender couples, then a couple, whether either or both of them are transgender can't achieve a pregnancy together, are eligible for a referral to publicly funded fertility services if they meet the other criteria, which is like age and BMI, etc. But this only means the couple obtain a free public consultation. Thereafter, they need to meet the standard criteria to obtain public funding. So, you know, again, there's a financial barrier there for such couples to have babies. So, you know, one of the things that when we're again, you go back to, well, why do people end up doing surrogacy? Why do people end up doing this? Is, well, because the rules we've set in the system discriminate against others. You know, it's that a drive for equality has forgotten about equity and forgotten about that actually there's certain reasons why these people can't actually achieve a pregnancy. But I guess the major issue is there's just not enough money in the whole pot that's driving all of these things. So to my mind, we need to look at this. I know from the Law Commission's review of surrogacy, one of the things that they're recommending, you know, although it's outside the scope of their review, is that work needs to be done in this area to review these matters and where we're putting our resources when it comes to fertility treatment. So moving on, let's talk about surrogacy then. What are the process and the procedures around it? So domestic surrogacy requires ECART approval, and I'm assuming that everybody that's listening to this knows what ECART is. It's the Ethical Committee on Assisted Reproductive Technology. So if you're doing a gestational surrogacy, which is where the woman who's going to be the surrogate has an embryo implanted in her, then you clearly have to use a clinic to do it, and the clinic must refer you to ECART. They need to do an application to ECART for their approval, and only once ECART give the approval can the surrogacy and the medical procedure take place. ECART's not required if it's a traditional surrogacy, where that's the surrogates using their own eggs and then sperm of one of the intended parents or donated sperm from elsewhere. Commercial surrogacy is illegal in New Zealand. It must be altruistic, and the woman who gives birth to the baby, so the surrogate, and her partner, if she has one, are considered to be the legal parents of that child from birth, and the intended parents need to adopt the child in order to gain legal parental status. So even if you're dealing with a couple who's created the embryo and it's their full biological child, they are not considered the legal parents until they adopt. A lesbian couple, slightly different. There's the only benefit I think lesbian couples get out of the legislation, which is that because if one of the lesbian couple is the birth mother, then her partner is recognized as the other mother of the child, and both of them can go on that first birth certificate. They don't need to bother about any adoptions and what have you. So, you know, there's some benefits there. In terms of international surrogacy, this is what New Zealand's current landscape looks like. As it shows there, these are the countries where people have been doing international surrogacy. USA is by far the highest proportion of people that going there, with places like Ukraine and Georgia coming in behind. But for members of the rainbow community, that list is Canada and the US, because in Mexico as well, and Australia. But as I say, the places like Australia, Mexico, Namibia, Philippines, etc., those are like one or two that have happened, and generally happen because one of the intended parents is a national of that country as well, and that they may have a family member in that country who's willing to do surrogacy, and that's how that's occurred. But in the main, people are going to US, or they're going to Ukraine or Georgia. But Ukraine and Georgia don't permit anybody in the members of the rainbow community. It's heterosexual couples only. Thanks very much. And pre-2015, until laws changed in these countries, Cambodia, India, Nepal, and Thailand, people were going there. But now, by and large, they are out the window now. As I was saying, you access conditions when you go to these countries. Canada is altruistic, which is non-commercial, open to everybody. Greece, altruistic, heterosexuals only, although nobody's ever been to Greece from New Zealand. Georgia, commercial, married heterosexuals only. Russia, commercial, heterosexual. Ukraine, commercial, heterosexual. US, commercial, open to anybody. So again, it limits where members of the rainbow community can actually go when they're looking at international surrogacy, because places Eastern Europe is not friendly to us. So New Zealand's process when it deals with international surrogacy is a sort of interagency approach, generally led by Irama Tamariki, and involves Irama Tamariki gets involved in doing assessments of the intended parents for their ability to adopt. Immigration New Zealand gets involved in relation to getting a visa for the child to come into New Zealand. Internal Affairs gets involved, issuing birth certificates and issuing travel documents if necessary. And then MFAT get involved if the shit hits the fan in the other country, really. So as I say, when it comes to domestic surrogacy or we're dealing with international surrogacy, New Zealand law applies across the whole world. And what that means is, irrespective of, say you've gone to the US and you've done a surrogacy there, and your US attorney is saying, well, look, it's all good. You and your partner can be named on the birth certificate as the parents. New Zealand says, we don't care. New Zealand law applies, and that is the surrogate is the mother of the child, and her partner, if she has one, is also the other parent of the child. If the surrogate doesn't have a partner, then it's the Immaculate Conception, and that's it. So as far as New Zealand is concerned, any birth certificate issued in any other country isn't worth the paper it's written on when it comes to surrogacy. It'll ignore it and say, you must adopt this child in order to obtain legal parentage status. So that's the way. Yeah.
So I've got a question. What if someone goes overseas, they go through this process, and then they just say, hey, New Zealand, we were overseas traveling, and, I don't know, for example, if it's a same-sex couple, a female couple, then they can just say, oh, we had the child while we're traveling, or vice versa, a male couple, my partner had the child, she's based overseas, she's not coming back to New Zealand. Are there any ways around it? Are there any sort of sneaky tricks that you could sort of look to? Obviously, taking your business law hat off and giving some insider tips. around international surrogacy, because it's so expensive. It's such a painful process. The New Zealand law makes it even more difficult than it needs to be. Obviously, it's changing and things are starting to look a lot better. But yeah, are there any tips that you could potentially give intending parents that may be looking overseas for a surrogate?
I mean, what some people do, and other people, it's happened to couples. There was people may be aware there was a gay couple who had lived overseas and had lived overseas for a number of years and who had children through surrogacy, and then were in the process of wanting to return to New Zealand. And when that happened, New Zealand said, well, you're not the parents of this child. And they're saying, what are you talking about? We are the parents of this child. We've got the birth certificates. And New Zealand said, no, you're not. The couple ended up having to adopt the child in the US. And once they adopted the child in the US, then our law recognized that adoption that had occurred there and then granted citizenship to the children, because one or both of the parents was also a New Zealand citizen or resident. So I think that when it comes to heterosexual couples, some of them could probably lie and get round the system. But when it comes to, gay couples particularly, then it's extremely difficult, because they're saying, well, where did this kid come from? And they're immediately on the alert to that this is potentially a surrogacy. And I know people who have, and either unawareness of the law or trying to push the boundaries, have applied for a visa for the kid and then or applied for citizenship for the children, and then either the Department of Internal Affairs or Immigration New Zealand has said, no, this is a child of a surrogacy, isn't it? Because clearly you're two guys, you couldn't possibly have had this kid together. It's from a surrogacy, isn't it? And then you say yes, and they say, well, if that's the case, our law applies and you're not coming in. So I know it's probably not what people want to hear, but really the best thing to do is to follow the process. From the get-go.
Yeah, right. There's a question, I don't know if you can see that. Does a child born in the US or to a US citizen surrogate need to revoke their citizenship?
No. Basically, if the child was born in the US, then the child is recognized as a US citizen at birth. They're not recognized as a New Zealand citizen at birth unless by some quirk of coincidence the surrogate happened to be a New Zealand dual citizen as well. But assuming that the surrogate's just a US citizen, then the child would be recognized as a US citizen by birth. And then once the adoption took place in New Zealand, the child would be granted New Zealand citizenship status as well, as long as one of the adopted parents was either a resident of New Zealand or a New Zealand citizen. And then that kid's then a dual citizen of the US and New Zealand. And then the question of whether you want to later revoke that US citizenship is a question that you may want to consider, for double tax agreements and what have you when the kid's 18. But you don't have to revoke the citizenship, and it's not a question of once granted New Zealand citizenship that you lose your US citizenship. That doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So New Zealand style then, when we're dealing with international surrogacy arrangements, is that as I say, we ignore what the birth certificate says in that other country. So we have to get Arama Tamariki involved to do an assessment of the intended parents as adoptive parents. And then Arama Tamariki provides a report to Immigration New Zealand, who in turn provide a report to the Minister of Immigration to say, there's a surrogate child on the way to New Zealanders. Can you please authorize the grant of a visa for this child to come into New Zealand? Because bearing in mind the child is not a New Zealand citizen. We're saying the child is not a New Zealand citizen, it's a US citizen. Ordinarily, a US citizen wouldn't need to apply for a visa to come into New Zealand, but in this circumstances, we make them. So the minister gets provided with information and then makes a determination to say, okay, as long as the intended parents provide DNA evidence, evidence of a surrogacy, evidence that they're going to preserve the identity of the child. So, what information do they have about the surrogate and the egg donor and what have you? And then information to show that they intend to adopt the child in New Zealand and that the surrogate consents to the adoption and to them traveling, then we will issue the child a visa. So all of that is done sort of pre the baby being born, meaning that when the baby is actually born, we can apply for the visa once we have all of this information, the DNA evidence and the child's US passport, etc. I've mentioned there the COVID protocol because that's the ordinary course of events, but currently we're dealing with COVID, and there's a COVID protocol that was introduced by the family court, which is that we will shortcut this whole process where a child is unable to obtain a passport in the country where they're born, without undue delay. So at one point, and I think it's still ongoing in the US, it was taking horrendous amount of time to get a passport for the child to get out of to then apply for a visa to get out of the country, because a lot of the services were shut in the US. So we developed this process that say, okay, we will have the adoption hearing online. So the parents sitting in the US with the baby, me as the lawyer sitting either in my house or in the court building along with the judge and the social worker, and the adoption hearing taking place live online. And then the court can grant a final adoption order, and when that's done, it means that the Department of Internal Affairs can issue the child a New Zealand passport. That gets couried over to them in the US, and then the kid can then fly in on the New Zealand passport and obviously doesn't need a visa to do so. So that, and the parents are recognized, the intended parents are recognized as the parents at that point as well. So that just sort of shortcuts the process, because ordinarily you would have to apply for the visa and get all of that sorted, then fly in, and then about 3 or 4 months later have an adoption hearing in the court, whereas this just shortcuts that whole process, which is really good. I mean, ideally we keep it even post-COVID, but looking at the Law Commission's recommendations around international surrogacy, not a lot is proposed to be changed other than it's a different type of order. You still have to go to the family court. You still need social work involvement. It's an adoption order by any other name, as far as I'm concerned, which is, I think there's a desire to push people away from international surrogacy and push them into domestic surrogacy, which is all good and well if there's a pool of people willing and able to be surrogates in New Zealand, which presently isn't the case. So as I say, once you file the application for adoption in the court, the social worker would finalize their social work report, an adoption hearing would take place, an adoption order would then follow from the court. Then you can get a New Zealand birth certificate issued. And, for gay guys, that's father and father. If it's 2 women, then that's mother and mother. We have moved things along when it comes to birth certificates. It wasn't always the case. I know that I dealt with a case where a lesbian couple went to register the birth of their baby, and they wanted mother and mother, and the Department of Internal Affairs said, no, that's not possible. It's never been possible, and we haven't been doing that for the past 15 years. And then I got involved, and it was actually, you can do it, and there's nothing to prevent you from doing it. And then it was, oh, sorry. So they managed to get the first birth certificate with mother and mother on it, and the Department of Internal Affairs agreed to redo people's birth certificates at no cost if they had been wrongly registered after that. So that was great. So the child becomes a New Zealand citizen, as I say, if one of the parents is a New Zealand resident at the time of the birth or a New Zealand citizen. Whereas if the adopted parents are not residents, so say they're work visa holders, then the child will also only obtain a temporary visa. It doesn't change doesn't make them New Zealand citizens. Yeah. There's a question here. Have you worked with international citizens in Colombia? Yes. Is it possible to do so under New Zealand law? Yes. If egg donor is anonymous, is that an issue under the New Zealand law? No. So I'll expand on that. Yes, I have worked with international surrogacy in Colombia, and my understanding is it's available to all. So it's possible to do it, and I've had adoption orders granted for those where the people have followed the correct process in Colombia. And and the fact that an egg donor is anonymous isn't a barrier to an adoption or anything. In fact, quite a lot of people who go to the US and other countries, it's also anonymous egg donors that take part. It's a bit of an anomaly when we're concerned about the child's ability to access information about their heritage when you don't have that information about the egg donor. But look, it doesn't prevent you from obtaining an adoption order. But ideally, the best position to be in would be not to use an anonymous donor, but things are what they are. But it doesn't prevent anything. And I've managed to rattle through my stuff, Christian. So people can throw up questions as they go, but I think I can hand over to you now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in the conversation that you just had before with regard to the Law Commission and what they're looking to change. So you mentioned that they're potentially pushing people towards domestic surrogacy, and you've mentioned that actually there isn't much of a pool within New Zealand. And so we went through the surrogacy process. We're in the second process right now. So our little girl is due in November. Our little boy we had 3 years ago via gestational surrogacy. We found our surrogate through Facebook the first time. So that was kind of a little bit out of the ordinary, putting ourselves out there into the social realms and asking people if they would carry our baby, because we faced similar issues. We couldn't afford to go over to America or overseas. International adoption wasn't a choice for us, and we were planning on adopting within New Zealand, and the adoption fell through the first time. So we thought surrogacy is something that we can control. The reason as well that we decided to go for domestic is because I guess it was, for us, it was easier. And obviously the cost to go overseas, I think it'd be anywhere from 150 to 100,000 US dollars in the States. Canada may be slightly cheaper. Mexico again is cheaper, but I know there's been, at the time and also recently, there's been quite a number of international surrogacy issues, particularly with Mexico. I know in certain parts of the world, they were sort of closing surrogacy processes down while people were over there, and things were getting India, Thailand, for example. So yeah, I think it just made sense for us. Based on that, looking through Facebook, we spent about 2 years trying to find a surrogate ourselves, and we found an amazing human who carried our child for us. But it really spurred me to think about, actually, this needs to be done better, because there wasn't anything as such. There was a Facebook page, and that was about it. So I started a page called Love Makes a Family. It's a website. It's a platform where people can go on and they basically just connect. It's like a dating service, essentially. It's totally free to use for people. If you're looking for a surrogate, if you're looking for an egg, or if you're looking for sperm or an embryo, then jump on to that website, essentially, put your profile up, and hopefully there'll be someone that matches with you, somebody that wants to carry your baby or offer you an egg or offer you sperm, and vice versa. If there's any donors out there that would like to jump on and create a profile for themselves that wants to offer to be a surrogate, an egg donor, a sperm donor, etc., then that's what the platform's there for. There's been a huge uptake in the last, I think I launched it about November last year, roughly. It's been very, very slow sort of build up, but we've roughly got it to where it needs to be. And it's starting to build with a decent number of people. I know about 5 different people that have actually messaged me and reached out and said, hey, we've met a surrogate, or we've met intending parents, or I've become an egg donor, etc., which is amazing. So it's working, which is the full intention, and hopefully we can grow it. But I am obviously a proponent for New Zealand surrogacy community. I think what is happening in New Zealand is great. Our Instagram page, I hear so many people coming through saying, hey, you've really inspired me to donate an egg, or donate sperm, or be a surrogate. So I think that pool of people is opening up, which is amazing. And I think it's only going to continue to grow with conversations like this that we're having, with awareness. A lot of people don't realize that actually the surrogacy process isn't just a rainbow or a same-sex issue. There's a lot of heterosexual couples that I know that struggle with infertility and have done for obviously a long time. But now there's avenues to A, be able to talk about it, B, be able to find people that can help. And yeah, there's clinics like Fertility Associates, etc., that are there to provide the follow through. And if only the government can sort of step up and back the legislation and make it easier, more financially viable with public funding, but also just getting rid of some of that red tape. It's that is definitely one of the barriers. Everybody should be able to have kids, and it shouldn't be a means test in order to be able to afford who can have kids. So yeah, I think a lot of the things that we're doing now within the community, as a wider rainbow whānau, is making a difference. So having these conversations, people that are watching today will be having conversations with other people, and it's just spreading that awareness, which is super important. So yeah, I think we're headed in the right direction. And as I said, I'm a big proponent for domestic surrogacy, but I understand if people can afford it. It is easy to go overseas, pay a clinic, have it all done, and then obviously the bureaucracy to get the child home. But it's a difficult and heart-wrenching process when you do get let down, time and time again, when you're going through that process originally, especially trying to find an egg donor, a sperm donor, or a surrogate.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I like about the recommendations from the Law Commission, is this looking at what you can pay a surrogate. Currently the law says, it's illegal to give or receive valuable consideration, and everybody says, what the hell does that mean? What the Law Commission is proposing is to list a bunch of things that could be covered, and one of the other things I like that they say is, that a surrogate is entitled to paid parental leave, but obviously your paid parental leave is capped. You only get like $500 for it or something like that. But if you get a surrogate who's paid $1,000 a week, then they're losing money. So we should be able to put the surrogate back in that financial position so they're not losing money. And that may in itself act as an encouragement for people to do it, because you're sitting there and think, Christ, I'm going to be massively out of pocket for months. Nobody's talking about commercial surrogacy. We're just talking about making people, sustain them in the financial position they're currently in without making matters worse when they're doing such a wonderful thing for people,
I mean, I'm not even opposed to commercial surrogacy. If there are people that are willing to go over to America to do it, or Canada or anywhere else, and pay that money, why not? Why can't we do that in New Zealand? Like, what is that opening up? Of course, there'll be people that will still do it altruistically. They'll be happy to receive gifts or top up their pay or whatever that is. Then, of course, there'll be people that will actually want to be paid a lump sum or whatever that looks like. And I don't think... I think it's up to consenting adults to make that decision. If somebody wants to be paid for it and someone's willing to pay them and can afford to do it, then great. On the other hand, there'll be people that can't afford, and there'll be people that'll be willing to do it altruistically, and they would be a perfect match. So, yeah, I don't know. I find it really interesting that the government does try and restrict certain things. Again, this law is from 1955, and there's not really any specific laws around surrogacy as such. Obviously, there's been precedents set, etc. But yeah, I guess we'll have to see. But the more people that provide feedback on the submissions for the Law Commission, I guess will hopefully allow the government to make a decent decision. But it is disappointing that the international adoption site isn't being looked at. I've got friends over in Thailand who want to adopt kids. They work with in schools and orphanages over in Thailand. They've been there for 5 years. They're both Kiwis, and they want to adopt a couple of kids over there. The New Zealand law is stopping them from doing so because of the inheritance law, which is crazy. So there's a lot of little things, and it would have been good to see the Law Commission pick up everything all together, but I guess it's a real piecemeal approach, and they're picking off bits that they can chew. I guess it's a bit of a beast.
Yeah, well, you have the Ministry of Justice is reviewing international surrogacy and so international adoption as well as domestic adoption. So, if anybody's got any burning issues related to international adoption, then they need to put that through the Ministry of Justice one. So, somebody's asked the question here, Christian, what's the hardest part of doing surrogacy in New Zealand?
Initially, it was finding a surrogate, finding an egg donor and a surrogate. We decided not to go down the traditional route because we had an egg 2 different times. So we had our best friend who offered us an egg. They were over in Australia. That created further complications. Our sister-in-law then offered us an egg. So we continued down the gestational surrogacy route. And then finding a surrogate was probably the hardest part. That took us about a year and a half-ish going through a lot of the processes, not knowing what we were doing. What do you look for? What are the laws? What are the rules, etc. So I guess understanding all of that and then finding the right person, because that person's going to be part of your life for the rest of your life. It's not just a transaction that you can sort of walk away from. They are part of your life. And I think this is a conversation that I'm really strong on, particularly when people think about doing home insemination jobs and having a mate that come over and, I can co-parent, etc., and not going through the ECART process, which involves the counselling. Personally, I think the counselling process is so important. The questions that they ask that you just don't consider, and really understanding that actually this is a lifelong decision that's going to impact you, your family, but most importantly, your kids. So when people think about having a home insemination, there's a lot of steps that I personally think are really important and helped us immensely with the questions and the conversations that we've had to ensure that the future for our children is going to be a well-established path. You don't want to have an upset family riff, with your surrogacy family, because your kids will want to have a relationship with them at some stage. I guess the anonymous donor side of things is a whole nother conversation. But for me, I think, the hardest part of doing surrogacy within New Zealand is definitely finding the right fit and particularly finding the right surrogate.
Yeah, well, that's the follow-up question. I guess somebody's saying you must have received quite a few offers for surrogates. How do you choose the surrogate?
Yeah, really interesting. So when we first went through Facebook, we had it went a little bit viral, and there was a lot of conversations had on breakfast tea and New Zealand and all those sort of things. And we had about 20 people say that they were really interested in being our surrogate. And I created a spreadsheet, and I went through, do they smoke? Do they drink? How often do they exercise? All these different things that I sort of thought, right, well, what's the best fit for a surrogate? Which was kind of crazy, but also, really important. The adoption process that we went through, we found out that the woman with the baby that was going to adopt to us was a pee addict, and we didn't find out till about 20 weeks when we were kind of committed to everything. We were going through the social work. So having those questions about smoking, drinking, drugs, etc., super, super important, because we didn't ask the person we were adopting from. We just assumed, naive and young, we were like, oh yeah, someone's having a baby, of course they're not going to be drinking or on drugs, etc. So we went through all of those questions. What's the support like with their family? Super important. I think it's really important they have a super supportive family because there's a lot going on with surrogacy. It can be really mentally draining. Part of the ECART process is to ensure that there's no sort of history of mental illness or depression, etc., because obviously having a baby in itself can be quite tough, and then giving up that child and sort of having a whole part of your life go away, not go away, but into someone else's life, and it can be, I think, quite tough, So really understanding the support networks, the intentions of the surrogate as well. What are they in for? Obviously, because it is altruistic in New Zealand, that you are hoping that they're going to be in it for the long term, for just giving back, or maybe they were adopted, or whatever that looks like. So I think that's really important as well. But I think, so if we go back and reiterate, it would be about what the intentions were, support networks, I guess the health and well-being of the parent, of the mother, the carrying mother, and just anything like that, really. I think it's super important that you get on well and you've got a good relationship. Previously, ECART required you to know the surrogate for a minimum of, I think it was 9 months, Stuart. I think that might have been reduced, 6 months. And so from there, you get a really good understanding. But within that 6 months, anything could change, or they could be hiding something. There's an example I've been chatting with now our surrogate, and she's really well connected in the surrogacy community, and she's told me a few examples of just things that are happening overseas with different surrogates and intended parents, and it's just mind blowing with what's happening. People don't want to give up the child, or the relationship's gone really badly or really sourly, or people didn't know things at the beginning. And it's I've heard other stories, and you've seen stuff in the paper, etc. So I think it's really, really important that you know who they are, their intentions, their support networks, and just get a good understanding. Would you want them to be your good friend for the rest of your life? Because I think they need to be. That's my personal opinion, but
no, I agree. We've had children from surrogacy as well, and it's the hardest decision to make is the decision to say no to somebody who's offering to be the surrogate, because the inclination from you as the person who wants to have children is that this may be our only opportunity. This may be the only time that somebody ever offers us to do it. So, that having to you need to be honest with yourself, and you need to think long term, as Christian says, that about who is this person? Do I like them? Do I want them in my life? And more importantly, do I want them in my kids' life as they grow? And, are there red flags here? And if there's red flags, you need to be prepared to walk away, even though, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Because you're exactly right. As soon as we started getting one offer, we're like, oh my god, this is amazing. Wow, I never thought this was going to happen. Okay, great. Yep, when can we meet? When can we sign up? Where do you want to sign on the dotted line? You get so excited because you've just been waiting and you've wanted this to happen. But you just, as you said, it's got to be the right fit, because there's a lot of people involved in this transaction, essentially, and it becomes a lifelong relationship. So while it can get really exciting and you're like, oh my god, we finally found someone, I think that's such good advice, Stuart.
So is embryo adoption?
Sorry, go.
And you go. So embryo adoption is an option in New Zealand, quite a big thing in US. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but you can donate an embryo within New Zealand if that's what you mean. So there is embryo donation, and that goes through ECART processes as well. So it is a thing, and it does happen fairly regularly.
Cool. Yeah, that's an interesting one. We have got quite a few embryos left over. So my partner and I, my husband and I, we've been on the surrogacy journey together, obviously, but the first lot of embryos involved my sperm, and then the second lot of embryos involved his sperm. And both times we were so incredibly lucky that our embryos took the first time. So we have leftover embryos, and the donor mother who gave us the egg is yeah, I think it's a conversation that we need to have around what do we do with the embryos because they're currently in the freezer. I did mention potentially giving some of them to a friend of mine who lives in America who's struggled to have kids. She's a little bit older and she's desperate to have children. And it's another conversation that you need to think about, and the relationship that you're getting into with these people. It's not just a transaction where someone's giving you an egg and sperm. This is like crazy. It's someone's life. Both people's lives, as the children, and it's also the donor, but then you've got the people on the other side of the world or whoever you're going to be donating to. And that conversation and the relationships that you have is very, very interesting. So, I think, I don't know. There's just so much to think about. And I know when you're in the position of wanting to have a family, you would just be like, yep, I'll take it. That sounds great. Let's do it. Let's make it work. And sometimes it's really just making sure it is going to be the right decision for everybody. What's the approximate cost of undertaking surrogacy in New Zealand? So I don't know about you, Stuart, but ours cost us about $60,000 the first time round. So we went through the whole process. It was $10K. That includes things like for our surrogate, they lived in the South Island, so we had to fly them up for appointments at the obstetrician. Obstetrician $6K. So all of those things sort of add up. So we ended up between about $50,000 and $60,000. We saved some money on legal fees. Sorry, Stuart. But yeah, there's the legal fees that are involved. You've got before the ECART process, you've got legal meetings and you've got to have letters and counselling sessions, etc. And then afterwards as well, you've got the adoption process. So we saved about $10,000 because I did the adoption process myself after our child was born, mainly because I wanted to understand the whole process from start to finish, and then be able to sort of simplify it and then share it with people, because I understand that actually the cost of adopting is massively prohibitive to a lot of people. And a friend of mine wanted to adopt their child out to their brother, and they ended up just not. They just said, okay, here's our child, and they went over to Australia and lived, and they haven't officially adopted their child because it was too expensive and convoluted. So I think that there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle and bureaucracy which costs a lot, that hopefully this review by the Law Commission will simplify and make it a lot less expensive. I know a couple of guys that went through the States, Canada, Vancouver, and theirs similar time to us, and theirs was about 150,000 Canadian, I think. Flights and all of the rest of it over there, etc. So, it's a massive, massive difference, but still 50, 60K in New Zealand is a huge amount to have a child. The second surrogacy process we've just gone through, or we're going through at the moment, significantly cheaper. And the reason for that, I think a lot of the IVF process was cheaper. We've had the eggs were already extracted. They were on the freezer, so that saved a significant amount of money. I think just a lot of the bureaucracy we already kind of knew, so it reduced some of the legal fees. ECART was probably similar. A lot of the fertility associates costs were less. So I would say probably, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 grand so far. I
think you can probably do it for, because it depends, how you do it. That if you have a private obstetrician or you don't, some people don't bother with a private obstetrician. They just, rock up at the public health door on the day of the pregnancy and give birth. But, if you can afford it, I think it's worth doing a private obstetrician, because then the surrogate's not having to deal with a different person every single time. They don't have to be explaining their story every time. They've got one person that they're dealing with who knows what their story is. So if you can afford it, then do it. But you could probably do it for about 20 grand would be you could probably do it for that.
Yeah, I guess it depends if you have to extract eggs, etc., and go through that whole IVF process on top of the ECART and everything else. And just one point to note is obviously New Zealand midwives are free, so you can have a midwife in New Zealand which will take you through your birth from I think about 12 weeks right through. And if you're having a C-section, you get an obstetrician to do the surgery. So Yeah, I've learned all of that recently too.
Yeah, I mean, you get what is it, the Leeds maternity provider or something like that. Yeah. LMC or something. Yeah. But somebody's asked me if I've got an office in Wellington. No, I have an office virtually where I can be anywhere in the world. So, yeah.
Which part, Eva, do we expect this to change by the Law Commission?
Well, the Law Commission is currently consulting. The public consultation was due to end in the end of September, and then obviously we've had COVID in between. So I think they were going to extend it out to October, but then the Commission needs to report to the government. They're talking about mid next year, but my understanding it's about April or May they're going to report, because the Ministry of Justice are also going to report at the same time on the adoption law reforms, and then that goes to the Minister of Justice to then determine what to do. My concern is that's about 3 or 4 months out from an election. So
right, no decisions will get made to get pushed out again.
Yeah, that's my real concern, is that no decisions are made. If Labour don't win the election, and then it's National that comes in, and it wasn't their project, so they maybe not have the same skin in the game that they want to push it through. So, because there was a Law Commission report that got done in 2005, and nothing happened with it, and we're now here in 2021 doing it again. So that's the danger of the political system. Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. I think it was scheduled in for an hour. It doesn't look like there's any more questions coming through. You're creating a voice. You're very welcome, JJ. Yeah, very welcome. I'm stoked that it's been used and people are making families. Yay, how awesome. I think Kate was going to jump on potentially and do a bit of a wrap up. Kate, are you there? There she goes. Excellent. Thanks, Jill. That was super informative as well. It's great to chat. You're always
I enjoyed it.
It was amazing. So it was really awesome to listen to you both, and the questions asked tonight were great. Just checking we don't have any last few questions here, but no, it looks like we're all up to date. So I just want to, it looks like this is us for tonight. Thank you for a great webinar. And thank you so much for your time as well, Christian and Stewart. So really appreciate you being here and being part of Fertility Week.
No worries, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I will bring up just our last slide, just with Fertility Week coming for the rest of the week. We've got a few more webinars, so stay tuned and jump on board for any other webinars that might be of interest for you as well. All of our webinars are recorded and will be available on social media. So thank you for joining us tonight. And once again, thank you so much for your time tonight, Christian and Stewart. We really appreciate it. So that's it. Good night.
Ciao, good night.
Night, everybody.